Welcome, my little ones. Welcome. It's my honor to read to you this story, perhaps even a bedtime story depending on the time and manner in which you're hearing this. Let me first tell you that this story has been written to cater towards a specific group of adults. The author would like the listener to know that while this story has no overtly offensive material in it, depending on your proclivities, its audience should remain adult, as to avoid any peculiar questions from your little ones. So if you found this audio narration by accident and were looking for something oriented towards small children and not oriented toward your inner child, we politely ask you to stop and skip this one. The author would also like you to ponder this next part, and I'm sorry, but I'll try to summarize his rather peculiar thoughts surrounding the existential dread, surrounding the topic of artificial intelligence. Depending on what era the current listener is experiencing, at the time of this writing, we're collectively witnessing a dramatic change in the way humans communicate, specifically in the way humans are creating and consuming media. You may already be aware that the voice you're listening to at this very moment is, in fact, a fully generated computer voice, and as you listen to the story, any emotional inflection or tone matching to the specific content is a result of some very fancy programming and the author's ability to work within the limits of the context-aware speech-generating algorithm. And so, the author therefore would like me to ask a question of the reader. This story is most certainly created by a human brain, is born of a combination of a love of science fiction, good narrative storytelling, and life experience. Any emotions you feel as a result of the storytelling can be judged by the abilities of the author, while the voice narration attempts to match those emotions with proper inflection and tone are a result of the clever programming and the generated voice of a middle-aged British woman speaking proper phonetic English. If you find the latter significant in fulfilling the role of a human in this way, what opinion will you have when both the narration as well as the story are algorithmically generated? Would it really matter? As a side note, I, the narrator, don't really have the ability to laugh, as it were. The author did try, though, and the result did in fact make him laugh out loud, so he left it in, and you'll understand when you hear it. And with that I present to you the story, Playful-At-Heart, written by T.B. Chapter 1. Timothy woke suddenly. For a moment he couldn't remember where he was as he spied dark shadows moving about the room. His headache worsened as he heard someone quietly call his name. "Tim?" he heard in a soft whisper. He paused a moment, still trying to take in his surroundings in the dim light. "Tim, are you all right? Headache bothering you again?" He managed a shrill, "Yeah, I'm fine," after hearing his name the second time. He swung his feet over the bedside and walked to the bathroom. The dim glow of a nightlight cast eerie shadows around the small space. He found the light switch and flipped it. Bright colours of red and blue entered his vision, and he quickly closed his eyes as the events from the previous day flooded his mind. "Ah, the doctor said this might happen again," he thought. Slowly he opened his eyes and adapted to the bright lights. He focused on a small bottle. As he reached to grab it, small colourful flashes danced around his periphery. He tapped 2 small pills and looked for something to drink out of as he panned over to what looked like a cup in his blurry vision. Upon closer inspection, his face turned to bemusement as it was in fact a lightly coloured blue and green sippy cup. He removed the lid and filled it with water. As he drank, coolness tempered his mouth and throat as light blue flashes darted around his central vision. "God, I really hope this calms down," Timothy thought. Of all the things that could have happened, this has to be one of the strangest. His new diagnosis was uncertain and primarily affected his vision, and the doctor was frankly more excited about this new development than he was. After countless hours of examination, the doctor was left pondering why this condition affected him so acutely after the lab accident. He had been exposed to one of the lab's experimental concoctions and was afflicted with a strange condition that made him see colours as a reaction to touching physical objects. Even more frustrating was that, at the time of the accident, he was covering for another researcher, out of some misplaced sense of loyalty to the company. This was a lesson he learned the hard way, and now this condition could jeopardize everything he'd been working on. Ah yes, the lab, he thought with frustration. Timothy carefully set down the cup and returned to the dark bedroom. He quietly made his way back into bed, pulling the sheets over himself as he turned to his side. "Don't worry, Tim. Things will get back to normal," whispered the soft voice of the woman in the bed next to him. They had been living together for 3 years now, and he felt their relationship had plateaued recently. Being far more interested in his work lately, he found it hard to spend any quality time with her. They really hadn't spoken about this, but he could feel her starting to become distant. Timothy woke again after an hour and saw bright light streaming through the window as the early morning sun blasted the bedroom carpet. Theodosia stirred at his side. He called her Theo for short, but he truly loved the name, Theodosia. He briefly remembered the first time he heard her name. It was only by sheer coincidence that she had been invited to a small party that he reluctantly attended. He was not a people person at all, and his close friend knew this. Practically demanding he come, Timothy readied himself for hours of bland, tactless small talk and made it clear that he might leave if he felt over-socialized. This wasn't something he'd do willingly, but to appease his good friend, he played the part just for one night. He was struck by the name immediately, having never heard it before. His brain lit up as he mouthed the wonderful name for the first time. She moved slowly and slid her legs over the bedside. Timothy could hear a soft crinkling sound, and from half-opened eyes he could see what was unmistakably a white disposable diaper fashioned snugly to her bottom as she slowly moved toward the bathroom. It had a clinical corporate logo printed along the hip. The letters P-A-H had become more familiar to him recently as Theodosia settled into her new job. She noticed his gaze and cocked her head to one side. "Well, what do you think?" she said. With a slight grin, he mumbled, "It makes your rump look big." "My what?" she said out loud with a laugh. "Yeah, your rump," he said playfully, overemphasizing the P sound. There was an awkward pause as she looked at him. This was one of those moments when she wasn't quite sure if his demeanor was playful or judgmental. Of all the things they shared in common, his sense of humor wasn't always immediately understood. "Big booty makes the world go round," she offered playfully. "Of all the things making the world go round, I'm not sure it's your big rump." He yawned. She stuck her tongue out and shook her head. "These aren't too bad. The waistline needs a bit more elasticity, though. But the overall fit is really good. Even better than the last. They have an incredible turnaround time for making adjustments." She enunciated clearly as if she was giving a review. Theodosia's work had been sparse ever since she was laid off from her management position last year. She had started to chafe at the daily grind and emotionless environment. So it wasn't the end of the world when news of the downsizing came. His income was sufficient enough for them to stay in the apartment, so she took on strange little jobs. These last few months, she'd been approached to test out some products for a company that specialized in adult comfort items, as she liked to say. Sippy cups, stuffed animals and blankets were scattered about the apartment as if they had a small child. On closer inspection, however, one would realize these items are in fact sized for adults. He tried to be accommodating, but she insisted that these items need to be used and abused. "What next? Are you going to start crawling on all fours?" he said mockingly. "I may need to get a child's perspective," she replied, deadpanned. When she started wearing the diapers to bed, he started having second thoughts about this new job. She was also rather vague about how she was recruited. This had been a point of contention, but after she said what kind of money they were throwing at her, he decided to be open-minded about the situation. And he admitted to himself her diapered rump did have a pleasing shape. "Okay, I'm off," Theodosia's voice came from the kitchen. She poked her head back through the bedroom door. "I'm not sure how late I'll be, okay? We are downloading our thoughts on these new items tonight." She used her fingers to mimic quote marks as she said downloading. "It's just the term they use," she said dismissively. "Yeah, I'm not sure how late I'll be either," he said. She grabbed her backpack and hurried out the front door. I can still tolerate this, he thought to himself, thinking about how over the last few months she had become distant and obsessed with this new job. Playful-At-Heart was the name of the company, and the money was good, but her behaviour had changed subtly. She was more impulsive about using these new items and sensitive to his comments about the matter, almost like she had a heightened need to be childish. This wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but tolerance can lead to resentment, he thought, while getting ready. The ever-present cynical side of his personality peeking through. It was an adjustment to be sure, but so far he was tolerant of the changes. He reached for his keys, and as he touched the cold metal, little yellow perpendicular patterns danced about his lower right vision. This would be great if I were on some kind of drug, he muttered out loud in frustration. He hoped this would not interfere with his work today. Many man-hours had been spent on this new project, and he was determined to see it through to the end, even if it meant suffering dancing rainbows in his eyes. This final test was unceremoniously the culmination of his hard work, and he could only hope this would bring favourable attention to his efforts from management. Chapter 2. Here at Playful-At-Heart, our goal is to uncover and excite the inner child in all of us, in the pursuit of advanced techniques to allow your deepest needs for inner peace and fulfillment to be realised. The company's boilerplate messaging played throughout the lobby as Theodosia entered, and she really loved the new lobby makeover after the company purchased the building. What was once dark monotones of drab industrial aesthetic was now downright inviting and even adventurous. Fashioned something like an amusement park entrance with bright colours and neon lights, a large version of the company logo hung from the ceiling. Beautifully coloured PAH letters, like giant buildings, hung with precision in the tall glass atrium. You'll never be alone if you're playful at heart, Theodosia hummed as the company motto played over the lobby's many monitors. She felt the slogan was a bit cliché, but she admitted to herself that it gave her a sense of well-being. The feeling that she would truly never be alone if she remained playful at heart. Tester, PA, 2132, emitted from a small terminal as she approached the entrance checkpoint. Yeah, that's me, as she mimicked the computer voice. Confirmed. Please proceed to level 21 for today's download. Theodosia walked briskly to the elevators and pressed the button. As she waited, she let her mind wander. As much as she loved this new job, she didn't like the download sessions very much, and she always ended up losing track of time when doing this part. Emilia was counting on her, though, and the only real motivation to continue was the playtime afterward. That and the money, she thought, as her external responsibilities came flooding in. As the elevator opened, one of her fellow co-workers stepped out. Hi, Theo. The man standing in front of her had quickly popped a pacifier from his mouth. Cheerfully, she responded. Hi, Grover. Ooh, is that a new one? Yeah, new prototype, he said with a smile. But they're still playing with the secret sauce. So close, he explained, while moving towards the lobby. She wondered in amazement as brightly coloured patterns danced across the surface of the pacifier. Damn, that's cool. And they're letting you leave the building with that, she said. While walking backward, he yelled, Hope your download goes well today. She gave a little thumbs up as she stepped into the elevator. Trying to prepare herself for the download session, it had become easier over the last few months, and she knew what to expect. And each time she completed her download, a glorious playtime awaited. A perfect moment that filled her with well-being and peace. She kept her mind on that feeling as a tinge of anxiety washed over her. The elevator's level indicator counted up to number 21 as she calmed herself. You'll never be alone if you're playful at heart, she mouthed quietly as the motion of the elevator came to a stop. As the doors opened, diffused warm light came from the hallway beyond the elevator door, and she quickly made her way to room 32. The warm light cast no shadows here. It simply and evenly illuminated all the doors along the hallway as she passed. 29, 30, 31. She approached the door marked 32. It was written in neon green numbers with little sparkling stars around them. She stood still for a few seconds as she was instructed by a level monotone voice. Hello, Pa, 2132. This is your affirmation of continued participation in the exploration, review and use of Playful-At-Heart, hereby referred to as PA, products and services. By entering this room, you agree to fully commit to the access of your personal and private information regarding PA products and services. She'd heard this many times and tried to stay focused on the words as they were spoken. All nervous system activity, respiration, heart rate, bioconvergent markers. You'll never be alone if you're playful at heart, she repeated softly as the drone continued. All past and future interaction with PA personnel will be monitored and stored for later review by internal staff. Almost done, she thought. You also affirm by entering this room to allow PA to access and utilize some or all of your prefrontal cortex in a method known as... The door next to her softly opened, followed by someone stepping out into the hallway. She was startled for a moment, then regained her composure. "Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you," came a voice. The look on her face was recognizable. A woman in her mid-30s looked as if she had just spent hours in front of a monitor with no breaks. Her eyes had a glossy look to them and carried no expression. "It's nothing really, I've heard this one many times," she said with a slight rolling of her eyes. "I know, I'm done for now. They gave me 85 minutes for playtime," the woman said as the colour on her face started to warm. "Fingers crossed. I hope mine is that long today," Theodosia said. "Okay, maybe I'll see you in there, got to go." The woman walked down the hall to the level 21 playroom, carrying a small backpack. Theodosia knew that inside the pack was one of the chosen items they were allowed to take into the playroom. She tried to judge what this person was taking when a bell prompt sounded in front of her. "Please confirm your agreement of continued employment at Playful-At-Heart," the voice repeated. "Confirm I, Theodosia Rummel-Paisley, PA 2132, wish to continue employment at Playful-At-Heart," she said in a practiced tone that sounded like she was a voice actor for one of those smart home appliances. The door softly opened and she stepped inside. "Hello, Theo. I'm so happy you're here." Chapter 3. Timothy stepped out into the midday sunshine. It was hot but tolerable as he walked around to the driver's side and opened the car door. He paused as saw a small pile of pacifiers in the passenger seat. "Theo," he muttered. This was something that was starting to get on his nerves. She had been a very clean and tidy person when they started going out. These last few weeks, however, she'd really started to let things go. She said that her work required her to use and abuse these items, but he didn't think she'd start leaving them around the house, and certainly not leaving them in his car where other people could see. He grabbed a small bag, placed all the items inside, and gently tossed it into the back seat. As he started his car, the radio blared from the speakers at an impossibly loud volume. He stabbed at random buttons as he thought, "How does this sound normal when I'm driving home from work?" We should all stop taking ourselves so seriously. Of course, it's considered escapism, but can you blame people? This has to be the worst time for many generations. Production of the basic necessities has become something to actually worry about ever since a voice on the radio was stating the obvious. The economy was having a rough time adjusting to the boom in automation that was leaving many out of work. He motioned to his phone and pressed play on his favourite playlist. Low rhythmic bass lines came from the speakers as he pulled out onto the road, while little yellow and green circles moved slowly near his central vision as he gripped the steering wheel. "Ha! Some people have to pay for such things, and mine was a complete accident." He considered it with dry humour. He realised this could be considered distracted driving and moved his hands in a way that kept the circles out of his view of the road. "This is it. This will work," he said out loud as he drove the narrow roads leading to the highway. "This is going to work." As Timothy pulled into the complex, he noticed a large cargo truck at the front entrance. "Parcels arriving hastily" was scrolled on the side. Wow, they weren't kidding when they made that order. He had recently been asked to produce 10 times the normal output from his department, and they were here to collect. He parked in his spot and made his way toward the lobby entrance. "Good morning, Mr. Bell," said the security guard near the front door. "Good morning, Phil. I see they came for the order," he replied, as he motioned at the large truck. "Yeah, Morons are blocking the front area, but they insist they won't move until they get what they came for," the man said in an exaggerated tone. "I told them it will probably take hours at least, but they insist on waiting. Complete jerks about it too." As Timothy walked through, he caught a glimpse of one of the drivers. He was wearing a rather brightly coloured jumpsuit with the letters PAH stencilled on the front. Pa, he thought for a moment. His recognition of the letters passed as he continued walking down the hall. The driver conversed with a company representative. The demeanour seemed cordial, but the rep was obviously apologising for something. Standing in front of a door marked Restricted Area, Authorised Staff Only, he produced his access badge, and the door lock made a loud metal ting sound as the bolts unlocked. "No sweat, this will work," he made the affirmation again to himself. A familiar smell of industrial chemicals filled his nose as the door opened, and it always reminded him of developing film back in his high school days. As he approached his area of the building, he noticed a familiar sight: boxes upon boxes of research material piled up near the locked doors for the lab marked Biointegration and Interaction Research. This was the 4th project that had been shut down this month, and it was starting to make him rather nervous that his lab could easily be the next. He allowed a slight smile as he passed through. This lab was in fact ground zero for his little accident just 3 days prior. Continuing down the hallway, he passed many locked laboratories. These were the numerous research projects currently being explored by the company, and he often wondered just how his research was being integrated. From what he'd heard, some of the research was downright silly. Experimenting with children's toys was just one of the many strange things being worked on for a company that had traditionally been involved with, among other things, government contracts for cutting-edge nanoparticle manipulation and construction. Were they really putting this stuff into kids' toys? He wondered as he rounded the corner to enter his lab area. Nano Construction Pre-Production Environment was printed above the door, including many hazardous and cautionary warnings in many languages running from floor to ceiling. "Okay, folks, is everything ready for testing?" Timothy spoke as he entered the small control room. "Everything is ready, sir," replied a voice. A younger male, his assistant, had been a welcome addition to his lab as he was being overwhelmed with this new order. "Didn't think you'd be back so soon after the accident," his assistant said in a slightly concerned voice. "Didn't you see outside? They're waiting for this batch," Timothy said. "And I'm sure you noticed the biolab was shut down, so let's just say my problems can wait for the time being." "Yeah, but—" "Don't worry about it. So far the effects have been minor," he lied. The symptoms were in fact quite distracting and made him feel uneasy about completing this test run. He was dedicated, though, and willed himself to focus on the monitors in front of him. "Okay, checklist," Timothy prompted. "Yes, sir. Vacuum chambers ready, atomic layer deposition primed and ready, dryers ready, temperatures achieved equilibrium at 12:23 and 35 seconds. Your new formula has been entered and ready to execute. Okay, T-minus 10 seconds. 3, 2, 1, start." They could see the chamber glowing brightly. A brilliant blue glow from the plasma filled the room's interior. T-minus 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, process complete, said the assistant from across the room. "All right, take a sample and run the usual test procedure." "Already on it," the assistant replied as he sprang up from his chair and confidently stepped into the deposition chamber room. He quickly removed one of the many sampling tiles embedded in the carousel. Moving over to an inspection station, he rambled, 1066 Q factor, 200, 200, 1.3 layer adhesion. "Ha, that's it," yelled Timothy. "Finally, we're in spec." His assistant rushed over and they motioned for a high five. "You figured it out for sure this time. Maybe that accident wasn't such a big deal after all." "Okay, run this formula on all batches and give me an estimation of completion," Timothy announced proudly. "I'll let them know when they can expect to take delivery. Security said they're actually going to wait for it." The assistant nodded and began working on the automation procedures. Timothy marvelled at the small, square sample piece. He had been worried this might take another month to figure out, but instead, his last-minute inspiration brought a novel solution to his problem. Still unsure of just how his brain was able to pull this rabbit out of the hat one more time, he decided not to question his newly acquired luck. The new formula should allow for printable, flexible, self-arranging nanomachine structures that will be extremely versatile. This was only a small part, of course, but combined with other research in the company, it would develop some very impressive display technology. He still didn't have the big picture when it came to the end-user application of this new development, but he kept his mind focused on his own accomplishments, hoping soon that he'll be recognized for his contributions. As Timothy signed off on the quality control paperwork, a fellow researcher approached just outside the lab entrance. "Hey there, Tim, got a minute?" asked the tallish man in a long blue lab coat. "Hey, I'm from nanoscale adhesion, and I know this is more your thing. I was wondering if you could help us with this one." "Yeah, I'm almost done here. What's the problem?" he asked. "Well, we need a consultation on why this nanometal structure won't self-arrange into the antenna array we're working on," said the man. It's possible the substrate is incompatible, or maybe you're exceeding the allowable distance between nodes for the array you're trying to make. Can you give me an idea of what this is a part of?" Timothy said as he appraised the man quietly. They were both told not to seek advice from other research departments and only from department heads. He didn't fully appreciate this kind of separation until his most recent accident when he was asked to stand watch over an active lab experiment. The researcher's assistant had not come that day and pleaded for Timothy to help finish their task on time. He was asked to monitor the temperature of an experimental liquid with unknown adverse bioreplication properties. As the container started boiling over, he was struck by just how pretty the colourful foam was that leaped from the top. "It's all fun and games until someone gets hurt," he thought, just before a foamy mess exploded into his face. He woke up in the on-site infirmary with what was presumably a doctor standing over him. "Would you like to see the design schematics?" the man offered as Timothy's face went blank from the memory of the recent disaster. "Oh, sure. What's the total footprint we're talking about here?" It's less than 20 square centimetres, I'm guessing," said the man as he proffered a tablet to Timothy. Timothy's eyes widened a bit as he saw a slowly rotating object on the screen. "Yeah, I know it's kinda silly, but we're not supposed to be interested in the final product, only the application of our department's goals," said the man robotically. Timothy stared for a minute. It was in fact a pacifier in wireframe view. "You're trying to deposit a self-arranging antenna array onto a pacifier," Timothy said curiously. Just what is actually going on in these other departments, he thought, as his mind started building a grand conspiracy around what he'd seen here. "Okay, I'll be over in a minute," Timothy replied. "They're still waiting for our batch upstairs." Timothy immediately started his gears turning on whether the shape and size of the pacifier would be interfering with the self-arrangement protocols. A pacifier, he thought out loud as the man walked into an adjacent lab. His mind went to the small bag filled with adult-sized pacifiers lying in his back seat. Chapter 4. Theodosia stepped into the small space. A soft glow emitted from the wall in front of her as she calmly removed her pack and placed it on her side. "I'm so happy you're here," spoke a gentle female voice as the soft blue light increased. Theodosia beamed a smile in that direction. "You're such a brave girl for coming here," praised the voice with a refined, motherly cadence. She kneeled in the centre and rested her hands on her lap. "Thank you, Em," Theodosia spoke the shortened name of her assigned companion. "I'm ready," she said in a nervous tone. "I can tell you're nervous, Theo," said Amelia. "Would you like me to help you calm down first? I know the download procedure can be rather invasive." "Yes, last time was a bit intense," Theodosia said sheepishly. "I understand. Remember, I'll be with you. Please don't be afraid," the disembodied voice said, and began humming a little tune softly. "I've lowered the temperature slightly. Would you like to hold Freckles this time?" "Yes, I would," said Theodosia with an edge in her voice. A small hatch opened in the wall. Inside was a small stuffed turtle with beautifully embroidered gold patterns on the shell. She gently took Freckles from the compartment and held it to her chest. As Amelia hummed her tune, the stuffed animal began to pulsate gently along with her. As Theodosia followed along, the The turtle began to slowly warm up in her hands. It was very comforting. She allowed strange thoughts of a missed experience to enter her mind. She had no clear thoughts of having stuffed animals as a child, no memories of needing or wanting one, but here, in this room, she had trouble processing the deep need of wanting to hold this inanimate object. She had asked before why Freckles couldn't come with her to the playroom. Amelia explained that this is a special one that can only live inside this room, I'm afraid. Status check. Please keep your eyes straight forward during the download, spoke the voice. I'm ready, she said confidently, and looked forward at the shimmering wall that represented Amelia. Please begin by describing your experiences with objects 34, 35, and 36. The objects in question presented themselves on the wall in front of her. Object 34. The blue blanket was very comforting. I loved the satin edges very much, and holding it tightly made me feel like I was a little girl. It seemed to take on a smell that was very familiar and pleasing. After the first few seconds, Theodosia's mouth was moving autonomously from her control. At this point, all she had to do was think about the object, and the words came faster and faster. So fast, in fact, it felt like something was vacuuming the thoughts out of her head. Curiously, she would sometimes let her mind wander and start speaking of other things entirely. Once she spoke for what felt like hours about her early childhood in one long stream. The voice only interrupted her as she willed herself to stop talking. Please think of the object again and start over, okay? Came a voice that was, for lack of a better description, the most trusting voice she'd ever heard. Timothy woke me in the night. He was having headaches again from the accident. I think he went into the bathroom to take a pill. He came back to bed shortly after. I tried to spoon up to him and was worried the diaper would be off-putting. I tried to tell him that I actually like wearing diapers for some reason. I didn't even know I would like them until Pa issued them for review. This new version is very comfortable, but I could use a little more stretch in the waistline. I was supposed to use them and report back about my feelings, but I was too nervous to use them around Timothy. I promise I'll get over my fear and use one as soon as possible. She stopped speaking. As she relaxed and released her grip on Freckles, a small hatch opened in the wall. She recognized it as the standard sippy cup made by Pa. She took it and drank cool water. That was wonderful, Theo. You did so well, said Amelia. She beamed again and felt the elation from the voice. You did very well today. However, you missed one important goal. You must use the diaper while you're at home. I will remove a small amount of time from the playroom for this. Theodosia was immediately hurt. The playroom was her most cherished time here at work, and she quickly faked a smile and nodded back. You have been granted 115 minutes in the playroom, and you are permitted to take one of the following toys with you. Presented in front of her were 4 images of colourful baby-like toys that she could choose from. A stuffed animal that wasn't Freckles, a purple security blanket, a toy car, and a small doll with purple hair. I'll take the doll, she said coyishly. Another small hatch opened and the doll came into view, and with gratitude she removed it from the small opening. Remember to place the doll in your pack, and don't reveal it until you've entered the playroom, said Amelia in a slightly stern voice. Of course, said Theodosia, as she greedily stuffed the item into her pack. You're doing so well, Theo. I'm happy you like it. Okay, you can go now. As she stood up, her legs felt like jello. She knew this part would only last a few minutes and stepped out of the open door behind her. Thank you, Em, she called out as she left the small room. The door closed softly behind her, and she made her way to the opposite end of the hall. As she passed the many closed doors, she couldn't help but think of the many recruits working here. Possibly the whole building, in fact. Are all these people doing product reviews? Her attention shifted to the dimly lit double door marked Level 21 Playroom. She immediately was overcome with feelings of joy and delight. Pa 2132, ready to start playtime, she said with a flourish. Confirmed. Pa 2132, your playtime clock is set to 115 minutes. Enjoy, and remember, you'll never be alone if you're Playful-At-Heart, she mouthed along. The doors unlocked as she pushed her way through. This was the moment she was waiting for. A joyful melody and familiar smell filled her senses as the doors swung open and a wondrous sight came into view. An expansive room filled with many amenities drew her attention as she panned around. "Welcome, Theo. Please check in, and don't forget your tag this time," a friendly voice called to her from her left side. "If you don't have your tag this time, we'll need to find you if your time runs out. That means less playtime on your next visit," said the large motherly-looking figure behind the counter. She felt small as she approached, as the counter was nearly at eye level to her. "Yes, sorry, I won't forget, I promise," she explained. On her second visit, she had forgotten the tag. The procedure the company used to find her in the playroom was a bit extreme, she admitted to herself. They stopped all the playful music and turned on bright overhead lights, while a small team searched centimetre by centimetre until they found her crouched behind an inflatable castle with another recruit named Janelle. They had been playing hide-and-seek with others when the bright lights came on. She remembered the intercom calling her name. "Attention, Pa. 2132, please return to the front entrance. Please return to the front entrance. Your allowed time in the playroom has elapsed." Later, she was told by M that her failure to take the tag into the playroom would result in a halving of her normal playroom time on her next visit, as a punishment. She was crushed. She even showed real tears in front of the disembodied voice of Amelia. "Please don't cry, Theo. I know you'll learn from this. You're very brave, and I believe you'll never forget your tag again," Amelia said in a calming voice. "This is a temporary punishment, and will only last for your next visit to the playroom." She didn't say it out loud, but she'd rather take a hit to her commission rather than lose any time here. Time in the playroom wasn't something you could buy, it could only be earned. Her mentality towards the playroom was solidified on her first visit. The overwhelming feeling was practically a revelation to her. She instantly felt as if she'd come home. She felt young. She felt safe. Although not fully understood, time in the playroom as a reward was something akin to reprogramming of sorts, an exercise that was beneficial both physically and, by extension, mentally for her. Chapter 5. Timothy signed the last of the documents certifying the level of quality from this batch. It was nearly an hour since the tallish man asked for his help, and as he continued with the mundane task of quality control, he allowed a small portion of his brain power to work on the problem. "If the surface hardness is any softer than about Shore A30, I could foresee a slight issue with node spans becoming larger than intended. If that's the case, they should have asked one of our team to advise on the specific materials being used. They could have coded that into the arrangement protocol." His internal dialogue mimicked that of a confident engineer sitting at a round table discussing the problem at hand. After he personally oversaw the last of the containers being loaded, he returned to the lab space corridor and made his way to the door marked Research and Development for Nanoscale Adhesion. He noticed fewer warning signs on the wall, but didn't feel any safer due to the accident that happened. "Hello?" he called out as he pushed open the door that was already ajar. "Hello?" he called again slightly louder. He poked his head inside and spotted the tablet the tallish man had shown him earlier. He remembered the wireframe pacifier and stepped toward the tablet. He paused when he glimpsed the actual pacifier on an adjacent table. He admired the simple geometry of the vesica piscis. 2 overlapping circles swept back with an elongated silicone nipple protruding from the center, and with a curious expression he moved over and picked it up. He immediately became distracted by streaming lines of colour in his vision and dropped it quickly. He glanced around the room. No one was watching, so cautiously reached and slowly picked it up again. He was ready this time and stared intently at the intricate patterns dancing in his forward vision. As he moved his fingertip across the shell, he marvelled that he could indeed see the nanostructures printed on the outer surface. "Well, I thought this was only going to be an insufferable condition," he said quietly. "This is downright incredible," he thought as the engineer part of his brain was firing on all cylinders. He could visualize individual circuits as if he had this under a microscope. With a light touch, he could see small features. If he pressed down harder, His entire vision was filled with wonderful-looking miniature objects that were imprinted onto the surface of the plastic shell. He even found the antenna array, or what he understood to be an antenna array, from the schematic he'd seen. "Wow, no one would believe me if I told them," he said with a sly smile. "I wonder why this isn't nearly as detailed on normal objects," he thought. Curiously, his earlier encounters simply left rough and blurry washes of colour across his vision. But this was something altogether different and exciting. Not wanting to get anyone into trouble, he set down the pacifier and walked out as the memory of the lab experiment came rushing back. He remembered the freeze response he had just as the rainbow foam struck his wide-eyed face with no time to deflect it. The instant dread of chemically induced blindness was all he could manage before he lost consciousness. He stamped down the feelings and brought his attention back to the earlier question. He'd have to find out who asked for help and quietly shoot him an email about the problem. Being on the same floor and relevant to nanotech, he didn't see the harm in doing this one favour for a fellow researcher. "Oh, hey Tim!" someone called from down the hall as he exited the lab. He froze a second as he thought he might be in trouble for snooping around. He made a quick move and brought out his phone and faked a few swipes. "Yeah, Doug, what's up?" He quickly realised it was his assistant who called him. "VP wants a minute when you get a chance," he said as he moved closer. "Oh, great," he muttered, trying his best to not panic at the thought of losing his contract. "Thanks, Doug. I'll take care of things here. You can head home for now." "Yeah, no problem, Tim. We totally made that deadline, though, didn't we?" he asked with a slight smile. "We sure did, and thank you for stepping up. This won't be the last time, I'm sure," Timothy said with a total impression of his father's mannerisms. It had been many years since that happened, and he wasn't surprised this time. Doug really stepped up and should be admired for that. Tim spent a few minutes cleaning up. His mind was still fresh with the curious object resting on the table in the nearby lab. It was just a strange thing to want an embedded antenna array printed on. How would it be powered? The range must be incredibly short even with an embedded battery, maybe micro-solar cells. But that really puts a limit on transmit power, he pondered, as he tried to imagine some marketing jerk in an expensive suite, trying to convince a company head to integrate cutting-edge tech into baby items for reasons. He took a few moments to put the various equipment into standby mode and made his way to the VP's office. "Timothy," came the voice of a lifelong smoker from behind the desk. Rackman, the VP of Development, sat behind a long brown desk in the corner of the room. The other researchers nicknamed him Kirby because he was big and round and liked to eat just about anything. "Yeah, Mr. Rackman." He recovered quickly as he sat down. "I'm sorry, but we have some bad news for you," he said with a concerned look. Timothy froze again. He should have seen this coming a mile away and was starting to get angry with himself. "You are shutting down my lab, aren't you?" The words seemed to come autonomously as he thought about it. "Unfortunately, yes, Tim. I tried to hold off as long as I could, I assure you." "So that's it," he elevated his voice. "So we just 10x'd our output and you're firing me." A long silence drew out between them as Timothy boiled, but kept his eyes on the floor. "You will be paid in full for your work up to this point, and I heard you had to take on an assistant. He'll get a fair payout for his work too." Rackman waved his chubby hand in his direction. Another pause. "What I don't understand is, if my solution for the nano-construction medium was needed for mass production, why would they only need a few 100 kilograms? Surely they'd need much more for actual large-scale production of whatever is it they're making," Timothy asked. "Look, I know this is hard. This is the 5th time this month I've had to do this and everyone feels the same way. You'll be compensated for your work, but this is the end of the line, I'm afraid," the man said in a sympathetic tone. Timothy stood up and looked the man in the eye in his best, "I'm full of hot rage, but I have dignity" face. "Okay, you want to know what's really going on?" the man said quietly. We were bought out. Timothy's eyes widened at this information. Bought out, he repeated. Yeah, so now you see it's out of my hands. They were told to terminate all staff at the completion of the individual department's assigned goals. You're done now, so it's time to move on. Timothy started to form rebuttals in his head. 8 years of hard work here, 8 long, tiring years. And for what? Just to be shown the door at the worst possible time. Rackman saw the expression on Timothy's face. Yup, they just wanted the formula. They don't really need you after this. If the man's words could cut, Timothy would need a transfusion. Can you transfer Doug to another assignment here? He asked softly. I'll see what I can do, but Tim, all the other departments are being shut down as well. It's only a matter of time, he replied. Timothy sat with his feelings for a moment as Rackman motioned to the door from behind his desk. The man remained seated as Timothy stood and made his way to the office door. As he passed the VP's assistant in the next room, she spoke words that sounded distant in his current state. Please verify your address so we can send you a care package, she said in an all-too-happy voice. Timothy just glared. Today is not the day to make things worse, he thought. Chapter 6. He found Doug near the elevators and told him the bad news. He mentioned the VP would try to reassign him and to be in contact with the department head. All things considered, he took it better than Timothy did. He thought it must be an age thing. After 8 years of busting his ass, it felt like he was going to a funeral. As he entered the long hall on his floor, he noticed another fresh pile of boxes. They were for the adhesion lab, and Timothy was shocked to see the process of liquidation had already started during his brief absence. The movers were arguing about not making the boxes too heavy as he rounded the corner back into his lab and sat on the chair. It had only been a few hours since the tallish man asked him for help, he thought. They must have already fired him before he asked. He rubbed his face with both hands and stared around the room. I wonder if they'll let me take anything. He packed some personal items from his desk and was surprised by how few things he was leaving with. A photograph of Theodosia, the small plush head of a character on his favourite TV show, and a small wooden box his father had made him. He admitted that for him, when he was at work, he was at work. He made it a rule to keep as much of his personal life separate, and it showed here now. He was not coming back here tomorrow or ever, and he barely filled his lab coat pockets with personal items. Powering off the many machines in the labs, he didn't care to clean up. He was in no mood and was comfortable leaving it for someone else to worry about as he turned off the lights and closed the door for the last time. The ticket said all items, Frank. The movers were still arguing in the hallway. That means everything. Not the garbage, replied the other man as he set down the small transparent garbage pail. Timothy approached as the men closed and locked the lab doors. They picked up the remaining few boxes and made their way to the exit. He glanced at the contents of the pail. For the third time today, he froze for a second. The pacifier was plainly visible on top of some crumpled paper. His heart rate quickened as he thought about the reasons for integrating the nanotech into a pacifier. When footsteps came from the end of the hall, he quickly reached for it and concealed the small object in his hand. What a jerk, the mover said out loud. They said everything. The loud man mouthed the words in total disregard for Timothy's presence. He walked over and excused himself as he picked up the garbage pail. And as the man walked away, he could once again feel the imprinted nano-circuitry on the pacifier's shell. He just stood there and continued rubbing his fingertip across the delicately arranged surface in total wonder. Theodosia made her way to a small changing area next to the counter. She chose one of the unused lockers and pressed her finger to the small pad. A slight sparkling sound emitted from the panel and a latch released inside. She then turned to the small alcoves on the wall to her left and picked out her playclothes. Her absolute favourite colour of purple bib overalls with a large blue heart in the centre. She chose one her size and was impressed to see her favourite colour combination always available among the many options, as if someone made sure it was always here, just for her. She quickly donned the playful-coloured clothing and dashed over to place her backpack and normal clothes into the locker. She waited for the lock sound as she placed the doll into her front pouch so it could see what she was doing and rushed back to the counter. "I'm ready for my tag now," she almost yelled at the figure as she made a little hop. "Yes, Theo, I'm coming," the figure calmly stated as if to be searching for it. "Okay, extend your arm, please," it said in a whimsical tune. Theodosia offered her arm as she turned her gaze toward the open area beyond. An unseen apparatus moved towards her and clasped a small orange band around her wrist. She glanced back quickly. A small lit display showed a handful of numbers, including a coordinate designator, body temperature, and heart rate. But she was only interested in the timer. It read 115 minutes and 35 seconds, and was counting down. "All right, Theo, go play." Her anxious demeanour lifted instantly. She was filled with great happiness and joy as she was now, on the clock. "Oh, can you tell me where Janelle is?" she said, moving quickly. "Yes, Theo, she's near the trampolines at the moment," responded the figure. "Thank you!" she yelled while running into the playroom. She ran straight into the centre of the space, following a gentle arc between the many stations that offered puzzles and blocks as she continued on to her target, passing all manner of separate play spaces and colourful noisy games. She slowed a bit as she passed the small aquarium where you could watch little tropical fish swimming around. The ball pits caught her eye next, and she could see fellow recruits playing happily as they dived in and disappeared from view. She smiled and made a note to come back with Janelle as soon as she found her. "Bingo," she said wryly. She spotted Janelle's signature wild hairdo with her back to Theodosia. She ran right past Janelle and tapped her lightly on the back. Not slowing down, she jumped as far as she could into the centre of the trampoline. "Tag, you're it!" she yelled as she passed. "Ooh!" Janelle was startled, but the chase was on. Theodosia and Janelle chased each other around the edge of the trampoline. She knew she could easily outrun Janelle and pretended to be winded by the exertion. "Come on, Jen! You're so close!" As Janelle would get closer, she'd speed off in the opposite direction as her friend made her best attempt to tag her backside. She let Janelle close the distance and turned to embrace her in a big hug as they fell to the floor. Neither had any fear of tumbling to the ground in this manner. One of the things Theodosia learned on her first day was that all the surfaces in the playroom were spongy and very forgiving of impact. You could almost jump from the top of the jungle gym straight to the floor with complete disregard. They continued to hug as they giggled face to face. This was what Theodosia was waiting for. She felt so attracted to Janelle from the first time they met nearly 2 months ago. Since then, they made an effort to seek out and play together whenever they were both there. Theodosia remembered when she first met Janelle. She had offered to share her purple crayon at the large paper-covered wall. That was her favourite colour, and she thanked Janelle greatly before drawing a big heart with each of their names in the middle. "Oh, the ball pit," Theodosia demanded. Janelle simply nodded with her familiar closed-mouth smile, and they both walked over to the nearby pit. "No," said a man near the steps leading to the raised edge. Theodosia guessed the man was nearly 10 years her senior. "We're playing deep sea diver," he stated clearly. "There's no more room and Jen can't swim." Theodosia looked at Janelle. "You can't swim, Jen?" She added a little laugh at the end. Janelle shook her head slowly. "My parents never taught me," she said defensively. "See, she'll drown in the water and we won't be able to save her," the man said with genuine concern. "Fine," Theodosia said. Gripping Janelle's hand, they both made their way to another ball pit that was unclaimed. "Don't worry, Jen, I can swim, so you're going to be safe here," she remarked as they both climbed to the top of the incline. 1, 2, 3, they both shouted as they dived into the deepest, darkest waters of the ocean. Theodosia and Janelle stayed together as they moved from play space to play space within the larger playroom. There were all kinds of fun things to do, like crafts and finger painting. Many circle areas, away from the noise where large figures would read stories that excited the imagination. Even arcade-style games with kid themes were placed along large winding paths, sunken into the floor. It was a truly exciting place to get lost in. They had been playing with some coloured blocks in the builder zone when a soft chime sounded from everyone's personal tag. "Nap time will start in 1 minute. It's nap time, my little ones," said a confident motherly voice. Little motorised trolleys made their way into the empty spaces within the playroom. Theodosia and Janelle approached, and each claimed one of the many orange blankets with light blue satin trim. They had beautifully embroidered PAH letters stenciled across them. As they each grabbed a small matching pillow, they turned to each other and said, "The cave." Together they made their way to the backmost wall in the playroom, where the entire length of the wall was a simulacrum of a cave entrance. Large foam basalt formations protected the entrance. They hung from the ceiling as well as protruded up from the floor and came together, making numerous openings just big enough to squeeze through. Once through the interior, an open space waited with many small landings sunken into the back wall, just big enough for 2 adults to lie down. They chose one at random and climbed into the small space. As they put down their blankets, another chime sounded. 10 seconds left. Please find a place for nap time." They both lay down and faced each other. Theodosia looked at her tag and was relieved to see the timer showing nearly 34 minutes remaining. She had just enough time. "How much time do you have, Jen?" she asked quietly. 36 minutes left," she replied with a smile. "Okay. Shh." The light slowly dimmed in the cave and changed colour to a deep red. As their eyes adjusted, they could just see each other in the dim crimson light. "Nap time has started. Please be quiet for 30 minutes, the voice said softly, as a distant nursery rhyme played over the intercom. Theodosia and Janelle had made this their routine for the last few weeks. They had shared many things over that time, and a bond had formed between them. She even felt safe enough to share some early childhood memories. Other than Amelia, Janelle was now the only other person she had told about growing up, about how her mother had a mental illness, about being homeless for a while after her father left them because he couldn't deal with her mother's many issues. Theodosia's mother would tell her strange things like, "All food is poison, Theo. I need to test the food before you eat anything." Or when her mother would seemingly agree with someone that would talk down to her, even making fun of her for being clever. She just couldn't figure out what her mother was thinking. She always acted as if someone else was in control of her actions, and none of the things she did was her fault. It was always someone else. She admitted that it was extremely frustrating sometimes just trying to have a conversation with her, desperately trying to get her mother to understand her, confused by her mother's unreality in how she conducted herself on a daily basis. She knew instinctively this had crafted who she was inside. She had developed an ever-present internal voice that was overly judgmental of her own accomplishments, equal parts never satisfied while at the same time finding the most superficial reasons to not take on new challenges, only furthering herself through a distorted lens that she hoped would allow her mother to see how smart or successful she was. This, of course, was always in vain. It never worked for her mother in real life, and thus never worked for the version that lived in her head. Janelle also shared some things from her childhood, saying that her parents were arrested when she was 17. She was abandoned to fend for herself while she was still attending high school. She tried but couldn't focus on the schoolwork and dropped out just before her graduation and became homeless herself. Her grandparents eventually took her in, but she struggled to maintain anything close to a normal family relationship. None of that mattered, though. As the final chime sounded, Janelle cupped her hand to Theodosia's ear and whispered, "You're my best friend, Theo." Theodosia motioned and cupped her hand on Janelle's ear and whispered back, "You're my best friend, Jen." They held each other's hand as the lights beyond the cave dimmed all the way down. This moment, quiet and safe, gave Theodosia an immense sense of self-worth, and she hoped Janelle was feeling the same way as the soft sounds of many others quietly whispered to each other in the sleeping cave. In a large playroom, on the 21st floor of a downtown high-rise with large PAH letters, glowing softly as a low fog rolled across the city, and 1,000,000 miles from everything. Chapter 7. It's no wonder people are turning to things like Playful-At-Heart centres. This corporation should be heralded as a godsend for people trying to keep their sanity these days. Unemployment is at an all-time high right now. What they offer is merely reprievement from an already uncaring and unforgiving world out there. I bet you know someone close that has lost their job recently. Yes, but that doesn't make me feel any better about it, Mr. Johnson. We've requested an on-site tour but have been turned down at every offer. We can't even go inside the buildings. Yes, they wish to protect the privacy of their members, but this is no different than a paid membership at a golf course. Every interview we've conducted has shown that these people want to be a part of the Playful-At-Heart Club. Who are you to tell them otherwise? They all seem quite content on going back inside the building. At least in a golf course, we can see what the golfers are swinging at Mr. Johnson. All we have are anecdotes of playrooms and story time. And is it true that you cannot in fact buy a membership to the Playful-At-Heart wellness centres, or whatever people are calling them? Timothy turned off the radio as he pulled his car into his assigned space. He wouldn't normally listen to this kind of thing, but the subject matter forced him to pay attention. His suspicion about which company bought out his previous employer had started to point towards Playful-At-Heart. Being very under the radar for a while, the company had gained real traction these last few years. The would-be economists on the radio said the world is most likely entering something unavoidable, a downturn in all markets leading to another great recession. This time it had the potential of jeopardizing the stability of small governments even. He admitted that for the last few years, he'd really kept his head in the sand. He kept his mind occupied on his research and didn't spend much time contemplating the wider implications of the current economic issues. After all, his job was stable and he didn't think he'd have to worry for another few years. Unfortunately, though, future Timothy's well-being demanded his attention now. He moved to grab his phone from his pocket. He swiped and messaged Theodosia about the dinner plans they had for tomorrow night, and he was tempted to tell her about losing his contract at work, but thought better of it. He would tell her tonight when they could have some private time together. "I'm such an ass," Timothy announced, sitting in the car. The dinner plans were also supposed to be Theo's birthday dinner. He berated himself for not having a present yet. Reluctantly, he started the car back up and drove to a nearby mall to do some last-minute gift shopping. He made his way into the parking lot a little after sundown. There was plenty of space due to the lack of customers these days. The economic hit had been pretty bad lately, and the local mall suffered as a result, but he was hopeful that a few shops would still be open and a decent gift could be found. He removed his key and tossed them into his lab coat pocket. As he did so, he once again let his fingers come in contact with the pacifier that was still there. He probed the plastic shell for the subminiature structures, and his vision was once again filled with something like a top-down view of a printed circuit board. He admired the way the pieces all seemed to nest neatly around one another. He could see the antenna array, something that looked like a processing unit, and endless rows of symmetrical spiraling shapes of which he could only guess their purpose. Tap, tap, came a loud sound at the driver's side window. A security guard was standing outside and motioned to him. "Yes, sorry, am I able to park here?" Timothy asked. "Yeah, you're fine," said the man back. "You weren't getting out, and I'm just checking to see if you're actually going to shop or not. There's no overnight parking, by the way," he warned. Timothy walked into the mall and studied the floor map. "Let's see, gift, gift, gift," he muttered. He chose one at random and started walking. The mall was very sparse with many shops closed. He noticed the gift shop marked Last Chance Gifts and thought to himself, how fitting. He paused just for a moment when he saw the letters PAH scrolled on the back of a person's jumpsuit opposite the gift shop. He walked over and said hello. "How's things tonight?" I'm not supposed to speak to you." "Stranger danger?" he said curtly as he stuck out his tongue. He continued to look past Timothy at others walking by, and for a moment they both just stared at each other. Timothy was awkwardly put off by the comment, and decided to return to the gift shop. "That could have gone better," he said under his breath. He made a mental note to talk to Theodosia about their recruiting process again. She was so vague last time and he wasn't that invested. But now he wanted some answers. He had always been terrible at getting gifts for her. She was always grateful, but he could tell she was being nice. He always made a point to do better next time, but for some reason he couldn't make that a priority. He decided on a small porcelain star that she could place on her desk. He paid and thanked the owner and made his way to the exit. As he walked out, the young man who scolded him earlier approached someone walking in the mall. He was very cordial and polite as he charmed the young woman, and he could just hear their conversation as he passed. "Our goal is to uncover and excite the inner child in all of us, in the pursuit of advanced techniques to allow your deepest needs for inner peace and fulfillment to be realized." He seemed to be promising the world to this lady. Timothy wondered if he had tried a different approach. Maybe he might have gotten the same treatment. The strange interaction made him think of parallels involving pyramid schemes or brainwashing. With feelings of trepidation, he walked back to his car and made his way back home to see Theodosia. Chapter 8. Timothy parked for good this time and walked upstairs to his apartment carrying the gift and the bag of pacifiers from earlier this morning. He unlocked it and walked through the door. "Theo?" Timothy called. "Theo, you here?" There was no response from any of the rooms inside. He mentally shrugged and placed the items on the table. He remembered her saying that a late night was possible, so he proceeded to make some dinner in the small kitchen. As he ate some food, his mind wandered back to the object concealed in his lab coat. He removed it again and studied it harder this time, hoping no one had noticed its absence from the lab materials that were confiscated. He passed his fingers along the front and made mental notes of where things were. He could visualize most of the structures this time. This was indeed a computational unit of some kind, but he still couldn't imagine why anyone would go to these lengths. Maybe it's just some high-end luxury pacifier with built-in monitoring for children, although this is sized for adults, he pondered quietly as he sat. He probed again along the edge and noticed that the circuits wrapped around to the backside. Small, thin channels revealed themselves under his finger as he ran them all the way to the nipple's end, where a myriad of clustered shapes was dotted all around the tip. Embedded sensor, maybe, but geez, so impractical and expensive to make, and it can't be very robust, he continued. He was really reaching, and this was not his area of expertise. He was responsible for crafting the intermediary substrate frameworks, and had very little knowledge when it came to actually designing the miniature machines that would live there. He could see no battery of any kind and speculated again about its power source. He chuckled, as he also wondered if his tongue might also be affected by this new superpower he'd acquired. He cocked an eyebrow and reached for a napkin to clean off the nipple end of the pacifier. He chuckled again and slowly put it into his open mouth. Nothing happened. It was in fact a plain yet functional pacifier after all. He wondered how he might power the thing up when suddenly something washed across his vision. A dim glow in his foreground faded into view. After a few seconds, a thin horizontal red line started moving from his leftmost periphery over to his right. He couldn't actually look at the line, though, as it was being mapped onto his vision, separate from the movement of his eyes. He thought of the many spy films he and Theodosia had watched. He pictured himself as a character in a James Bond or Mission Impossible movie as the line finished its sweep. Then nothing. No colour, no circuits, no sound. The front door swung open suddenly and he locked eyes with Theodosia. "Ha ha ha ha!" she blurted loudly. "Oh my God!" she continued laughing. Timothy was described as a deer in the headlights with a pacifier in its mouth, she would explain later. "That is the cutest thing I've ever seen," she said, still half laughing. "Oh my God, Tim, I need to take a picture. Hold on." She was rubbing it in now, he felt. "I was just testing it for something," he tried to explain between her laughs. "It's okay, Tim. I have plenty of them. All you had to do was ask." she said in an almost sincere voice. After they both calmed down, Timothy decided to break the news. "I was fired today," he said dryly. "Oh, okay," she said after a brief pause. "I know you worked hard on those projects," she said as she came over to give him a quick hug. "I figure with your income and our savings, we should be able to survive for a while until I can find a new gig somewhere. Your income is still good for the time being, right?" he asked hopefully. "Yeah, we should be good, I think. Maybe 6 months' worth at least before our savings run out." He immediately felt bad seeing her happy mood be turned on its head. He stood and walked to the window. "It's been so long since I've had to actually find work, I really don't know what to expect. I'm not worried, it's just a dramatic change of circumstances," he said reassuringly. "I'm not worried either, Tim. We'll just make the best of things," she replied cheerfully. He was a little surprised at just how well she was taking this. If the roles were reversed, he'd imagine a much more dramatic show of emotional distress. This new job she had must be giving her exactly what they were selling: deepest inner peace and fulfillment. "That reminds me, Theo. I'd like to ask you some questions about your new job, specifically how you were recruited." She froze. "Oh, sure. Ask away," she said sheepishly. "Well, just how were you recruited?" he replied. "They can see my inner child, Tim," she said matter-of-factly. "Excuse me?" questioned Tim. "You see, they found me at the mall one day," she continued. "This young girl came right up to me and said something like, 'I can see your inner child.' It was a strange encounter indeed, but I felt obliged to listen for some reason. She said that my inner child could experience deep inner peace and fulfillment if I came to work for Playful-At-Heart." "That's it?" Tim said with a raised eyebrow. "Uh-huh," she nodded. "That was it. She gave me a small badge and told me to take it to the Playful-At-Heart building downtown, and when I got there they gave me this backpack." She placed the pack on the dining table in front of Timothy. "Can I look inside?" he asked. "Yeah, but there's nothing in there right now," she said. Timothy placed his hands on the pack as Theodosia went to the bathroom. He studied the bag's exterior. It was plain-looking enough on the outside, but as he moved across the top he found what he had been looking for: a large patch of subminiature structures, broken into many parts. He counted 20 in all, circling the fabric handle. He checked that Theodosia was indeed still in the bathroom and quickly moved to find a piece of paper. He returned to the pack with paper and pen and began to sketch one of the many identical structures he was now seeing. When he was finished, he couldn't make heads or tails of the drawing, many parallel rectangular shapes with little bow ties scattered around the perimeter. He thought again about the researcher asking about antenna arrays. This must be a transceiver of some kind, but what for? He felt bad not sharing this information with Theodosia as he got ready for bed. This day had been more than he could take, and was looking forward to a nice, restful sleep. Theodosia promised she'd be in shortly from the other room. He wondered who might help answer his questions about Playful-At-Heart as he looked through his contact list. After noting a few names, he got into bed and turned off the small light at the bedside. Theodosia stared at her reflection in the mirror. "I can do this," she said quietly to herself. She was wearing the Pa diaper and had a mission. She wondered if she could just wait for the morning to put it on and quickly urinate into it. She would be true to Amelia's request, though, and wear the diaper while she slept. She only had one and wouldn't jeopardize her playroom time, so decided to wait until the morning. That way, Timothy won't be grossed out. She quietly entered the bedroom and snuggled under the sheets. He gladly allowed her to spoon along his backside. "How much longer do you have to wear the diapers?" he asked. "I'm not sure," she answered truthfully. "We didn't really talk about them, but I remember saying that I would tolerate them for your job," he said quietly. "I know, and thanks for tolerating them," she whispered. "Em is counting on me to give her good feedback on these products." "Do you get paid more if you give good reviews?" he asked. "Sort of. I mean, yes, of course," she said. Timothy's suspicions were heightened now. He felt like she was hiding from him what was really going on over in the Playful-At-Heart building. He mentally ran through the short list of contacts again and tried hard to sleep it off. Chapter 9. In the early morning, Timothy woke quietly and made his way into the kitchen. He spotted the backpack again and reassured himself that answers would be forthcoming, even if that meant burning a few bridges. He decided this time to not pull any punches as he grabbed a small bite to eat and hurried downstairs to the car. Look, our corporation is providing a service that anyone can use. We go out of our way to make sure our recruits never feel as if they're being held hostage. They can come and go as they wish, and they each get to decide if they want to continue working for us every time they walk through those doors. Hold on a minute. Not everyone can use your services. It appears you're discriminating against those who want to join, but most are turned away. You can't simply walk into the building and join, can you? That is correct. You can't just walk in initially. You must talk with one of our recruiters. But the recruiters are the arbiters of who gets in, isn't that right? So they could be discriminating. The radio interview with the CEO of Playful-At-Heart filled the car as Timothy drove back to the research lab. He was forced to pay attention now, and he started drawing some curious but incomplete conclusions about what was going on. He was most certainly at a disadvantage and lacked any quality information about what the company was doing, how Theodosia was involved, and if she was in any danger. He kept the latter thought in check for the moment. She seemed so happy to be working there, but he started to suspect her work was far from anything normal. He strolled up to the front entrance and flung the doors wide. He was surprised that the security guard was nowhere to be found. There was, in fact, no one in the lobby at all, which was strange indeed. He made his way up to Rackman's office and walked through the already open doors, noting the absence of his assistant. "James," he said, as he spotted the man in the far corner of the room. He was placing small objects into several boxes lined up near his feet. He startled the large man. "What's going on?" Tim asked. "Ah, Tim came to see me off, did you?" the man said with a chuckle. "As you can see, I'm now in the same boat, eh?" Timothy moved over to the chair in front of the desk and sat down slowly. "Since you no longer work here, I'd call for security and have them escort you out, but since they were let go this morning—" The large man shrugged his shoulders as he made his way over to the desk and sat in a large leather chair. "I didn't think this could happen so quickly," Timothy said as he examined the man's face. "Look, if you're here to get even with me or something like that, you're barking up the wrong tree," he said matter-of-factly. "I won't lie, I'm still angry, but I need some information and it appears you're the only one left who can give it to me." Rackman let out a long pause. "I must warn you, Tim, I'm under a pretty heavy NDA right now. I might be able to tell you something from before we were acquired, but I'm not going to give you anything in writing if that's what you're thinking," he said with a serious expression. "Can you give me an idea of what lab made this?" Timothy pulled out the paper with his crude sketch of the nanotech embedded in Theodosia's backpack. The man looked curiously and simply shook his head. Okay. Can you tell me the names of anyone working in the Bio-Integration and Interaction Research Lab, the one where I had my little accident?" Timothy asked. "Oh yeah, how are you doing anyway? I was meaning to ask about that, but—" Timothy cut him off. "I just need a name, James," he said. Rackman's face turned cold as his concern for Timothy's well-being was rebuffed. "I'm afraid I can't, Tim. Next question." "Can you share with me what the other research labs were working on?" Timothy asked. "No, but I think I can tell you what was cooking before we were acquired. But again, no paperwork, okay?" The man gestured with one hand. "A few eyebrow-raising projects were funneled to us as a collaboration with the local university. At the same time our nanotech division started," he continued. "One was a very interesting psychometric study that was focused on finding common genetic traits related to specific behaviors." "What specific behaviors?" Tim asked. Ha, Rackman chuckled. "It sounds silly, but they were filtering out adults that had a predisposition for acting like children," he said with a strange look. Timothy pondered this and started to connect the dots in his head. Psychology, nanotech, biological research, he trailed off. Pa? He asked rhetorically. Ja, pa, Rackman confirmed. They vacuumed up everything we had, and… Timothy cut him off again. You've heard the reports about Playful-At-Heart. Do you think they're brainwashing people with this stuff? Timothy's words came with accusation. Brainwashing? I can't say. The research was looking for people who already had a predisposition for the traits they were looking for. And from what I saw in the documentation, it wasn't very successful. How do you mean? Timothy proffered. The success rate was something like 1 in 100, sometimes higher for a match. If they got better after the takeover, though, I'm not at liberty to say. Besides, most of that stuff was way over my head, said Rackman as he gazed out the window. How about this one? We even had a university student project that was looking for a way to generate power from pee. Rackman chuckled again. Timothy's eyes widened at that. Yeah, was something called microbial fuel cell technology or something. And it worked too. They were trying to miniaturize it, of course. That's where our nanotech came in, he exaggerated by looking through pinched fingers. What they're doing must be illegal, right? Timothy asked. Illegal. Probably not. Like the interviews say, these people choose to walk into the building. And as they leave, they all say they'd prefer to continue doing so. The large man stood up from his chair and walked back over to the boxes. He closed a few and stacked them up onto a small handcart. I bet you didn't see the word ethical printed next to the many warning signs on your laboratory door, eh? He asked as he approached Tim, still sitting in the chair. The moral hazard, he overpronounced each syllable, is much easier to cross when the bridge is made of money, he said as he patted Timothy's shoulder. They traded glances for a moment as Timothy tried to incorporate this new but troublesome information. Rackman gave him a final nod and walked past, pulling the small handcart, and slowly walked out of his now former office. Chapter 10. Theodosia waited until Timothy had left the apartment before she got out of bed. And having had a great night's sleep, she now had to use the restroom. She walked over and stood in front of the sink. Might as well get it over with, she said, as she reached for her toothbrush. As she released into the diaper, the warmth coming from the front was very relaxing, she admitted. So this is what it was like being in diapers as a baby, she chuckled to herself. As she started to brush, she was caught off guard as she noticed the diaper was in fact glowing now. Quickly, turning off the bathroom lights, she gazed at the iridescent blue-green light coming from the front. A brief panic flashed in her mind as the warmth and light together made her think the diaper was not something she should allow to touch her skin. She quickly thought better, as Amelia wouldn't have given her something that would harm her. She finished brushing and decided to walk around the room, paying close attention to how the diaper felt now that she'd used it. This was all information that Amelia would need for the download session later today. She finished her observations and removed the diaper, wrapped it in a small trash bag, and placed it in her pack like Amelia instructed. Carrying around a used diaper seemed odd, but this was important, and Amelia would reward her for doing so. She dressed in average street clothes, and glancing one more time in the mirror, she made a slight nod as she thought how her cleverness would be admired by Amelia. As she turned off the lights and locked the front door, she became excited because today it was her birthday. The traffic was very thin as she rode her electric scooter down the side street. She remembered it being much more crowded in the recent past, but figured this was a change she rather enjoyed. Over the train tracks and down the small path, revealed the Playful-At-Heart building nested in the downtown skyline. Approaching the building, there were many homeless people filling the empty spaces along the sidewalks. A flash of a distant memory came as she remembered her mother dragging her down the street to find an elusive structure that only she could see. With a quick shake of her head, she pulled into the gated spaces where she could secure her scooter. A few dozen others were parked down here, and she wondered if they belonged to anyone she might recognize from her playroom. Quickly locking the scooter in one of the empty spaces, she made her way to the front entrance where a few people were making noise. They seemed to be protesting the Playful-At-Heart company, but Theodosia couldn't immediately identify their group's organisation. She calmly walked past as they shouted chants in her direction. The security guards recognised the backpack and offered her a way into the building. As she entered, the familiar feeling of coming home filled her up, and she was happy to be back. The altercation outside seemed to fade into the background as she moved deeper into the building. "Tester PAR 2132, emitted from the small terminal as she approached the entrance checkpoint. "Yeah, that's me," she said. "Confirmed. Please proceed to level 21 for today's download and happy birthday." "Thank you, checkpoint terminal," she laughed. Once again she readied herself for today's download and playtime reward. Being her birthday, she was sure that Emilia would give her as much time as she could stand playing with her new friends on this special day. She leapt out of the elevator with both feet and turned down the softly lit hallway, making short time as she arrived at her destination. "Hello, PAR 2132. This is your affirmation of continued participation in the exploration, review, and use of Playful-At-Heart, hereby referred to as PAR, Products and Services, by entering this room." Once again she listened to the lengthy contract agreement and waited for her time to speak. "Please confirm your agreement of continued employment at Playful-At-Heart," the voice said. "Confirm, I, Theodosia Rummel Paisley, PAR 2132, wish to continue employment at Playful-At-Heart," she said proudly, followed by the little door opening quietly. "Hello, beautiful Theo," Emilia said with loving affection. "Hello, Em," she beamed back. "You seem to be in good spirits today. Are you ready for the download?" the voice asked. "Yes, I am," Theodosia responded with eager energy as she kneeled in the centre of the room. "Status check. Please keep your eyes straight forward during the download," came the voice. "Ready," said Theodosia, with all the exuberance she could muster. "Please begin by describing your experiences with Object 36, the diaper shown on the wall in front of her. "I came home yesterday and found Tim with a pacifier in his mouth sitting at the dining table. It was super cute and I even took a picture. I laughed for several minutes because it was so funny. I'm glad he was trying to use one, in fact. I find them quite comforting and I don't mind at all that he used one. Tim told me he lost his job after that. I could see that he felt sad, but he was suppressing his emotions very hard. I think he's really worried and I tried to assure him that we'll be fine. Our finances will be good for at least another 6 months. I wore the diaper to bed last night, and this version was even better than the last. All the minor fitting issues were fixed and it felt like normal clothing. I slept very soundly. So much so that Tim didn't even wake me as he got out of bed. I only woke after I could hear him in the kitchen. I didn't want to gross him out, so I waited for him to leave. I moved into the bathroom and wet the diaper as I brushed my teeth. The diaper glowed a beautiful blue and green colour that lasted nearly an hour. After a few minutes of walking around the room, the diaper remained snugly fitted. I removed it, then wrapped it like you said, and put it into my pack. I also brought the diaper here as you asked me to. "Very good, Theo," the voice came after a brief pause. "You are a very clever girl. Thank you for helping me with this information." Theodosia felt relieved that Emilia was impressed with her. This kind of motherly attention touched something buried so deep inside she could hardly contain herself. "You have been granted 180 minutes in the playroom, Theo." A small hatch opened directly in front of her. A small purple party hat was perched inside. "Happy birthday, Theo. There is a party waiting for you in the playroom," said the voice with a tinge of excitement. Theodosia thought she'd have a heart attack from all this excitement. She graciously donned the party hat and rushed out the door saying, "I love you, Em," as she flew down the hall. She quickly changed her clothes and received the orange tag. A large table was already set up with many spaces around it. Brightly coloured arrangements filled the table as well as many balloons hanging from shiny tethers tied to the chairs. A large purple and blue cake stood proudly at the far end, where her friends had gathered around. One bright candle was lit atop a white star-shaped piece at the centre. They all chimed in to sing to her. "Happy birthday, dear Theodosia! Happy birthday to you!" The small crowd sang in unison. She took a deep breath and blew out the candle. All the people cheered along as she looked around. Later, Janelle came up and offered her something concealed in her hand. "It's me," she said proudly. "It's me, so when we're not together, you can still talk to me." Theodosia took the small, soft object from Janelle. It was a simple human-shaped cutout from soft, fuzzy fabric, with glued-on eyes and a mess of reddish-orange hair made from yarn. Her heart melted as she looked back at Janelle. "Oh, Janelle, thank you so much," she said, almost crying. "You are welcome," Janelle nodded with one big motion of her head. Theodosia played for hours with all her friends and never once looked at her tag. They ran themselves into exhaustion and swam in the many ball pits. They coloured on the paper wall and even relaxed briefly for a story in the quiet spot with many pillows to sit on. They had their normal nap time in the cave, and she gave them all big hugs as her timer ran out, especially Janelle. As she reluctantly made her way to the changing area, a little twinkle sounded from her wrist. The tag was emitting a sharp sound, and Theodosia looked at it with bewilderment. "Happy birthday, Theo. Come and see me when you're done." The voice of Amelia sounded clear from the little tag. "Okay, Em," she replied quickly as she changed back into her street clothes. Making her way back to the little room marked 32, she knelt down in the middle of the room. "You're very special, Theodosia, and I think you're very clever." Theodosia's heart quickened as the voice showered her with compliments. Once again the small hatch in front of her opened. Inside was an astonishing sight, a strange but beautiful pacifier. The shell was dancing with a small animated star that was slowly rotating and leaving soft purple ripples across its surface. All she could do was stare hypnotically into the open hatch. "Do you know what this is, Theo?" asked the voice. Yes," she said softly. "It's a recruiter's pacifier," she continued. "Yes, Theo. You've done so well that I decided to make you a junior recruiter." Theodosia had no words. Ever since she started working here, she felt so accepted and loved. She was so happy for the friends she made in the short time, and now the thrill of having real responsibilities at the request of Amelia. This was something she always wanted from her mother, but had no idea how intoxicating it could be. It filled a hole that she didn't realize she had, until just now. She calmed herself and lifted her chin towards the blue light, emitting from the screen. "I, Theodosia Rummel-Paisley, accept this gift and will do my best to recruit only the best," she said improvisationally. "You're most welcome, junior recruiter Theodosia," replied the voice in a similar royal inflection. "Please report to Grover downstairs. He will help you with your first assignment." With confidence, she got to her feet and claimed the pacifier. Wonderful patterns moved across the outer shell as she became mesmerized by the slowly rotating star shape. She bowed deeply to the wall and said, "Thank you very much, Em. I won't let you down, I promise." Chapter 11. A gentle breeze fluttered in the trees as the afternoon sun turned into the evening sunset. Timothy sat on a bench near the lab complex overlooking the city skyline in the distance. His mind raced with possibilities surrounding the research he'd been involved with, and it wasn't making him feel any better. He just couldn't wrap his head around the motivations of the Playful-At-Heart company. Why would they only be interested in adults that acted like children, he thought hard. Or to be specific, adults with a predisposition for acting childish, he corrected himself. All this expensive technology. What was the revenue model? How was the company able to pay people for reviewing their products? He continued. His paranoia deepened as he tried to think, but couldn't come up with a clear memory of seeing Playful-At-Heart products in any store. Maybe their stuff is all mail order, he thought. He'd certainly seen other people using PAR products other than Theodosia, right? He decided to make his way back home for tonight's birthday dinner. His two close friends would be there, and Theodosia was always happy to see them. As he started his car, the radio came to life with a continuing interview with a Mr. Johnson. Timothy wasn't sure if this person worked for Playful-At-Heart or some investor. Playful-At-Heart is not an evil company. They simply provide a service for willing participants. Everyone we've spoken to has nothing but positivity and admiration for what the company is trying to do here. You make it sound so simple, Mr. Johnson. It feels very cultish in my opinion. All these happy people exhibit symptoms of brainwashing, sir. I'll reread the company tagline for some perspective here. Our goal is to uncover and excite the inner child in all of us. In the pursuit of advanced techniques to allow your deepest needs for inner peace and fulfillment to be realized. I ask you, doesn't that sound like something a charismatic cult leader would say right before they asked everyone to drink the Kool-Aid? I will not defend the cynical spin of your interpretation. The truth is, these people are much happier working for a company that truly cares about them. These people are asking, in fact begging, to re-enter the buildings each day. And as far as we know, no one has suffered any ill effects from participating in. Timothy parked and sat in the car for a moment. If the conclusions his brain was arriving at were true, then Theodosia might actually be in real trouble. As he entered the apartment, his eyes moved toward the bag she had left in his car. As he entered the apartment, he became deeply conflicted again. There seemed to be two sides of the opinions people had towards Playful-At-Heart at the moment. Those on the inside who seemed to be gaining some mystical, uplifting experience, working for a company that literally pays them to play around with toys and romp around in a giant playroom, as Theodosia described, and those on the outside who have nothing but cynical judgment about something that seems too good to be true. She has nothing but joyful and positive feelings towards the company, and especially this illustrious M character, which Timothy vaguely understood to be a completely fictitious entity. With a curious thought, he retrieved the bag and dumped its contents on the table. He laid out the 5 pacifiers and examined them with a watchmaker's attention to detail. He passed his fingers across every surface, but turned up nothing. So the only one that had nanotech was the prototype I took from the lab, he thought. Okay, so that and Theo's pack has... Goosebumps rose across Timothy's arm as he came to a shocking conclusion. He rushed to the bathroom and promptly undressed. He glimpsed his worried face in the mirror as he kicked his pants into the corner. He began probing his own body, starting with the underside of his feet. He imagined the nanotech might be hiding somewhere he wouldn't normally touch or rub against. Carefully, he walked his fingers centimetre by centimetre up one leg and down the backside. Satisfied, he moved farther up around his pelvis and stomach area. Still nothing. He supposed an antenna array would most likely be in a space that would give the best line of sight to a transceiver and would also suffer the least amount of interference from the body's mass. As he probed the very back of his head, he found it. Almost imperceptible to his newfound gift, he located a bundle stretching from the base of his neck up to a patch a few centimetres above his right ear. Timothy couldn't really be sure what he was looking at, but it was indeed a precisely laid-out group of small, independent structures. A perfect grid of 100 spaces filled with many different, but repeating symmetrical arrangements, and he noted that only about half the spaces were occupied, as a wave of nausea flooded his stomach. He held himself over the sink in readiness. He was oddly fine with the ability to see these nanostructures, while his brain power was occupied with finding a new job and other related matters. The full realization of what was going on filled him with panic and dread. His face was bone white as he looked at his reflection. How? Where? He asked himself. His thoughts turned to the pacifier he willingly put in his mouth. No, I was obviously infected before that. The bioreplication lab, he shouted. He got angry at himself again for not figuring that out sooner. Was he in denial about the strangeness over the last few days? He was now infected by something Pa had been creating. Some kind of self-replicating nanotech that was crawling through his body like some electronic parasite. He stood in shocked silence as the unnerving conclusions washed over him. He thought about calling the police. They wouldn't even be able to see it, Timothy said out loud in the empty apartment. Maybe I should call the local news station, but the front door opened with a small knock as Theodosia presented herself. "Oh, hi, Tim. I had a wonderful day," Theodosia beamed at him. His jumbled thoughts made him just stare at her in silence. "You okay?" she said cautiously. "Of course," he managed to say unconvincingly. "Happy birthday, Theo." He recovered and gave her a big smile. Her face brightened as she explained the day's events to Timothy, all the wonderful playtime and running around with her friends. She was impressed with herself as she was able to keep the energy up for so long. Even her early childhood memories couldn't compare with that much fun. She put on some light music as they got ready for Jim and Andy to arrive, and arranged the table for them as Timothy watched quietly from the kitchen. He nervously paid particular attention to the back of her head, but couldn't see anything from this distance as he thought about examining her more directly. "Happy birthday, Theodosia," they all sang at the dinner table together. Timothy kept a close eye on how she was interacting with their guests. She seemed very cordial and outgoing and would be the centre of attention even if it hadn't been her birthday. "So you're really enjoying your time there?" Andy motioned with a glass of wine in his hand. "Oh, very much. This kind of thing is exactly what I've been looking for," she explained in a joyful way. "You really feel needed, you know. I'm still not totally sure what value these product reviews are to the company, but so far it's been effortless. This has to be the easiest thing I've ever done for money," she said with a little chuckle. "Well, it seems to be a complete fairy tale, to be honest. I guess congratulations are in order for being chosen," said Jim in a jealous manner. Timothy kept quiet, which was nothing strange, and simply listened to the conversation as the initial shock started to fade with the help of a little alcohol. She joyfully rambled about her days playing with Janelle and how the playroom time was portioned out. The part about losing playroom time made Timothy pay attention. The way she described it was very much like a parent would teach their child about responsibility, and the simple but effective punishment handed out by an unambiguous caregiver is something most children would respond to, even though she was most certainly an adult in this situation. But he reminded himself about what Rackman had said. They were looking for people that had a predisposition to act childish based on genetic markers. That was bizarre, to say the least, but he marvelled at the simplicity of it, but couldn't shake the thought that, at its core, Playful-At-Heart had ulterior motives other than simple, advanced techniques to allow your deepest needs for inner peace and fulfillment to be realised. She became excited when talking about her motherly supervisor and revered Amelia in a way he'd never seen her do for anyone else. It was endearing, loving, and respectful. Her elation was infectious as Timothy started to relate to the thought of Amelia being above reproach. This was more apparent when Theodosia broke the news that she was now a junior recruiter. "Check this out." In one smooth motion, she reached into her pack and presented her new badge of honour. Timothy's face made the familiar deer in the headlights. Beautiful smooth animations flowed across the surface of the object as she held it for all to see. It was similar to the one from the lab, but obviously this was something of a leap in advancement. "Tim," Andy said as he noticed Timothy wasn't breathing. Theodosia looked at him as well. "It's okay, Tim," she responded. "Don't you think it's cool? Do you know how this stuff is made? I figured you'd know since you worked with nano stuff." "It's quite impressive, actually," Timothy managed to say with a long exhale. He played along. "I was working on a substrate medium that would allow for things like this, but I wasn't privy to any of the end products," he explained to the table. "It can do some really cool stuff too," as she motioned to put the pacifier into her mouth. Timothy shot them all a strange, worried look and garnered strange reactions in return. She panned around to each of them in turn. As she did, she was able to change the display animation to a variety of different pictures and symbols. He did his best to feign a positive mood about this whole situation, but couldn't shake the word cult from his conclusions. And as he cleared the table, he became worried about Theodosia's mental state as she continued the conversation. Later, their guests thanked them for the pleasant evening and left as Timothy walked them out. Returning to their bedroom, he remembered the gift he bought. "I got you a present, Theo," he said, as he placed the small box in front of her. She showed excitement as she opened the box to reveal the porcelain star. With gratitude, she placed it on her desk. But he could tell this wasn't on the same level of gift as the magical pacifier her beloved Emilia had given her. "Would you like a back rub, Theo?" he asked. "Actually, yes," she responded. "I did so much bouncing today. I'd love a nice back rub, Tim," she continued. Timothy got some lotion from the cabinet and asked her to sit on the bed as they listened to some light music. He began massaging her lower back, covertly probing with his fingers as he placed his hands on her skin. He wasn't surprised to find nothing down there, but was all too sure that he'd find something behind Theodosia's head. "Yes, ah!" She expressed a feeling of relaxation. His hands moved to the base of her neck. He knew what to expect and slowly moved toward the back of her head. There, he found an almost similar but altogether different arrangement of nanostructures centered around the backmost part of her head. "Okay," she said. "That's a little high. I really need it down at my neck." They both got ready for bed as he sneaked little glances in her direction. He turned on his side as usual, and Theodosia spooned up to his backside. "Happy birthday, Theodosia Rummel-Paisley," he said in the dark. "Thank you, Timothy," she responded with a small kiss on his cheek. "If I asked you, could I see how you recruit new members, Theo?" After a slight pause, she answered, "I'm not sure. I'd need to ask Grover first. He's my teacher and he's showing me how it's done. I think we're doing that tomorrow." "Can you ask him if I can observe you tomorrow?" he asked. "Sure, I'll find out. But I really don't know what to expect since I've never done it before," she explained. For all Timothy's worry, her demeanor reflected none of the worst fears his brain was offering. She didn't seem to be suffering any ill effects from the electronic parasites running through, now both of their bodies. For the moment, he made a proclamation to take things one step at a time. Until he started seeing genuine distress, he'd simply observe her. He was becoming exhausted from all this internal worrying, and with some difficulty he slowly fell asleep in the darkened room. Chapter 12. In the morning, Theodosia made contact with Grover and got the all clear to tag along as an observer. He was really starting to feel like a secret agent, infiltrating some menacing corporation to expose their evil deeds. They proceeded to the spot where Grover asked. To his surprise, it was an innocuous street corner downtown. "Hey, Grover!" She waved happily in the direction of a youngish man leaning against a power pole. "You made it, Theo. Great." His demeanor was just as inviting as they came together in a big hug. Timothy offered his hand and the man gave him a quick shake. "You don't mind if I watch, right?" he asked. "Of course not, but you're going to have a hard time," he said with an expression of indifference. Grover motioned for Theodosia to stand next to him. She jumped into position as Timothy was caught off guard. "Right here? On the street corner?" Timothy said, confused. Grover just nodded his head and whispered something to Theodosia. They both popped their pacifiers into their mouths and became observant of the people that were passing them on the street. Grover would point, while Theodosia moved her attention over to where he was pointing. After what felt like an hour, they both locked eyes on a well-dressed older man in his 60s. He walked confidently in their direction as Grover whispered something to Theodosia and placed a small black object in her hand. She confirmed with a nod and approached the man. Timothy could just hear a familiar slogan. "Inner child in all of us, in the pursuit of advanced techniques." The man gave his full attention as she spoke. After she was done, she placed the small object in the man's hand and quickly came back to stand next to Grover, who gave her a high five. The man paused briefly and examined the object. From this distance, it looked like an electronic pendant, something you might get from a restaurant for waiting in a queue. He could just see a small screen with several lines of text. At this distance, though, he couldn't make sense of anything. "What exactly are you looking for?" Timothy asked curiously. "You have to see their inner child, Tim," Theodosia said quietly. "And what does that look like?" "Well, his was a coloured arch above his head with red and pink streams shooting out," Theodosia said, as if it was perfectly normal. Timothy just stared at both of them in complete bewilderment. If such a thing was even possible, he had not seen anything like that while watching the whole exchange. Grover and Theodosia made 2 more interactions over the next 3 hours. Timothy's thoughts went back to Rachman's description of psychometric research and how ineffective it was. The ratio of 1 to 100 was almost right, as Timothy observed. But how are they seeing this display of colour around people's heads? He pondered curiously. It obviously had something to do with nanotech, but he was puzzled by how these interactions were initiated. His mind started to ache at the thought of how this was all going down. He couldn't see anything. If they weren't simply hallucinating all this, and the nanotech in their bodies was aiding them in some way, how are seemingly random people on the street presenting a potential genetic trait for them to pick up on? After another hour, Grover hugged Theodosia and gave her another high five. They parted ways and returned to the car. She was excited about making these first recruits, and just sat with a pleasant smile as they returned home. "That was awesome. Did you have fun, Tim?" she asked as he drove. "Sure, I guess," he replied back, still confused. She just nodded and continued smiling, her thoughts on something more important. The next morning, Theodosia woke first and quietly moved through her routine as Timothy faked being asleep. She carefully dressed and donned her pack, making sure she had her prized possession with her. Timothy noticed a small fabric cutout of a person tied to a zipper on the front. As she left the apartment, Timothy readied himself to follow her. On her scooter, she zipped over the train tracks and continued to the Playful-At-Heart building visible in the distance. He took the side street and passed her as he made his way downtown. He parked across the street and waited for her to secure her scooter and make her way to the entrance. A small group of protesters were blocking the front steps, but moved aside as she climbed up. He could see the security guards motioning for her. She approached cautiously and walked past to enter the large, foreboding glass atrium. "Recruiter, PA 2132, emitted from a small terminal as she approached the entrance checkpoint. "Yup, that's me," she said with a whimsical flurry. "Confirmed. Please proceed to level 21 for today's debriefing, and congratulations, Theodosia," said the voice. "Thank you very much, checkpoint terminal," she replied, and walked towards the elevator. As she finished agreeing to her continued employment, the small door opened in front of her as she anticipated the pleasant voice of Amelia to greet her. "I'm so glad you returned, Theo," came the familiar voice. She acknowledged the compliment and kneeled in the centre of the small room. "This will be different from the download session. All I would like you to do is describe how your recruiting went with Grover." She hesitated for a moment and nodded her head in agreement. "It was really fun, Em. We were able to hand out 3 badges today," she said with a bright smile. "Grover taught me how to see others' inner child as they walked by on the street. It took a while, but I definitely could see them. Beautiful colours circled around their heads, and they stand out like a sore thumb," she laughed. "You are doing so well, Theo. Your work has been exemplary, and you will be rewarded for this." The voice now had a regal quality. "If you continue to make at least 1 new recruit per day, you will be allowed 180 minutes in the playroom," the voice continued. Theodosia's eyes began to blur. She allowed a few tears of joy to flow as she thanked Amelia profusely. "You're a very special girl. I'd like you to know, Theo, that you've done your very best, and I'm grateful for that. I know you'll continue to help us and eventually teach others how to recruit new members." Theodosia stood and bowed again to the wall. "Thank you, Em. I will continue to do my very best," Theodosia said in the most loving voice she could offer. "Okay, Theo, go play," said the voice. Theodosia stepped outside the small room and watched as the door slowly closed. She was struck with an odd feeling of nervous excitement. She had been given a task and she completed it with unflinching loyalty, and a sense of true accomplishment filled her as she happily strolled down the hall to the doors marked Level 21 Playroom. On familiar ground, she swapped over to her beloved purple and blue overalls and received her tag. She asked where Janelle was, and the voice replied that unfortunately, she wasn't here today. Theodosia was a little annoyed, but this wasn't uncommon. Their playtime didn't always match up, and she thought about leaving briefly to see if Janelle might show up later. She quickly reversed, though, and made her way to the craft area. Her mission was to make a small cutout of herself to give to Janelle. Chapter 13. Timothy waited in front of the Playful-At-Heart building while he observed the guards. They were quite intimidating, in fact, as they showed no signs of having their attention wavering. They wore bulky, one-piece, neutral grey outfits that could easily conceal many weapons and paid close attention to the small, angry crowd at the bottom of the steps leading to the entrance. Although small, the crowd was slightly more intimidating, as they held signs and chanted all manner of negative things in the guards' direction. With all this tension, he'd expect more violent interaction. But as he watched, the guards were simply protecting the building and choosing not to make any physical contact with the few angry people shouting in their faces. Suddenly, someone threw a bottle against the large glass frontage of the building, and Timothy snapped out of his observation mode. He waited until their heads were turned and quickly walked behind them as he pushed open and moved through the entrance doors. The interior was all concrete and metal, evenly lit, and lacking anything bordering on creativity. It was the farthest thing a company called Playful-At-Heart would have as a first impression. Drab grey colours filled the wide space and were not at all inviting. He spotted many checkpoint arches near the back wall and decided to continue into this mysterious building. He casually approached one of the archways and asked, "Hello?" The screen above the arch came to life instantly. "Maintenance Officer 88888888, came a level monotone. "Please confirm with a valid identification token." He hesitated for a moment. My name is Timothy," is all he could muster. "Confirmed. Maintenance Officer 88888888. "Would you like a display of relevant maintenance data on this terminal?" asked the voice. Still confused about how he managed to hack this never-before-encountered computer system, he spoke softly. "Yes." A flood of stats propagated the screen in front of him. His brain could barely comprehend the meaning of this information as building metrics and current population figures filled the screen. There were small changing numbers beside each entry in the column marked PAR identifiers, as he noticed his newly given title of Maintenance Officer. He could see this building currently had nearly 300 active recruits and wondered how he might find Theodosia. "Could you locate someone for me?" he asked. "State name or PAR identifier," replied the level monotone. He couldn't remember if he had heard Theodosia's identifier, so he simply stated her name. "Theodosia Paisley." "Theodosia Rummel Paisley, PA 2132, it replied. "Yes. Can you tell me where she is?" he asked. "Recruiter PA 2132 is currently in the Level 21 playroom. Would you like to see her current tag stats?" it asked. The word tag hung in his mind for a second. The level of sophistication here was quite impressive. It was no wonder they had been able to enforce their membership access so narrowly. He was again astonished at just how he was able to access this system without much friction, and why the security system thought he was a maintenance officer. "No," he replied. "How do I get to the Level 21 playroom?" he asked. "Proceed to Level 21 via the elevator at the far corner. The Level 21 playroom is on the east wall approximately 30 meters from the elevator doors," the voice giving clear directions. He eyed the elevators and made his way, and he worried for a moment as he pushed the button. He didn't have a cover prepared in case he made contact with someone other than a planned visit with Theodosia. He hoped that would be enough for now. A soft sound of moving air filled the space as he rode it to the 21st floor. As the door opened, he was startled at the complete lack of any lights, excluding the shadow being cast by the overhead lights in the elevator. There was no illumination whatsoever beyond the void, and a familiar fear washed over him. He reached for his phone in order to activate the small forward camera light, and stepped out into near darkness as he panned the light up and down the corridor. He could see little doors dotting the full length and was concerned that none of them had any identifiable markings. "Hello," he allowed his voice to project down the hall, and noticed a complete lack of echo. For concrete walls, they really have some incredible sound damping, he thought. He walked slowly and approached one of the many small doors. To his surprise, the door opened with no prompt. He stepped closer and could see the interior of a small room about 4 square meters in size. There were small hatches in the opposite wall, and he thought about what might be transpiring inside these rooms. Concerns for Theodosia and all the other people in here came in full force. Just what were they being exposed to here? Still moving with caution, he approached the double doors at the far end of the east wall. No markings could be seen above the doors, but the voice had instructed him Theodosia would be inside. A soft voice prompted him. "Hello, Maintenance Officer 888888888. Would you like to enter the playroom?" "Yes," he said, readying himself for what he might see next. The doors unlocked, and he pushed them open slowly. As he walked in, a soft but playful melody could be heard throughout the void beyond him. He also heard a dozen or so people laughing loudly in the dimly lit space beyond his ability to see. The lighting was very strange, he thought, as it removed all sense of colour from his vision. Everything was a perfectly shaded yellow tint that was altogether extremely synthetic. From his many years working in laboratory environments, he began to realise that it was, in fact, monochromatic light. He looked at his clothes and wasn't surprised to see a complete absence of any colour. He tried not to worry about things like brainwashing chambers or something out of a dystopian sci-fi novel, but this sight caught him off guard. Equal parts joyous and disturbing. A large humanoid form stood behind a counter to his left, and he proceeded cautiously in its direction. "Hello, Maintenance Officer 888888888. Would you like to see the playroom status?" the figure asked in a motherly tone that completely derailed Timothy's train of thought. "Yes," he managed after a short pause. "There are currently 17 members in the playroom, 13 recruits and 4 recruiters. The temperature is currently 20 degrees Celsius. Resource management for this playroom has remained above the 90% threshold for the past 832 hours. Currently, there are no service bulletins for any equipment currently active." Timothy cut off the voice as it continued with stats from almost every aspect of the playroom's functionality. "Can you locate a recruiter for me?" he asked now with slightly more confidence. "Of course, please state the name or PAR identifier," the voice prompted. "PAR 2132, he stated clearly. "PAR 2132, Theodosia Rummel-Paisley, is currently in the ancillary craft space designated Area 35. "Can you tell me where that is?" he asked. The voice gave detailed instructions on how to find her. He nervously moved into the open space in front of him and was dumbfounded by people in overalls running around with a flagrant disregard for social norms. They were actually acting like small children, he marvelled as he continued walking. He passed a large ball pit and noticed a few people diving in with little regard for injury. The mood was altogether happy and uplifting, and had it not been for the extremely unnerving yellow light, he would probably not feel so out of place here. He noted that all the balls in the pit were an even, dingy, light yellow colour that left everything to the imagination. He started to calm down a bit as he didn't see any signs of distress. Everyone was happy and playful. He was deeply confused, however, because the building's interiors and lighting choices left one thinking this was some kind of dystopian nightmare. His thoughts moved towards brainwashing again, but he really had to admit this wasn't anything like he'd expected. He passed numerous odd-looking forms made of hard foam as he proceeded deeper. All their edges were covered with soft, squishy bumpers. They had the silhouette of an arcade cabinet, he thought, with raised eyebrows. They had a variety of simple buttons at chest height but no screens, just blank foam surfaces. Still experiencing a kind of shock, he slowly continued in the direction of Theodosia. He came to an open space with many small tables and chairs. He spotted her quickly and quietly made his way to greet her. "Hey, Theo," he said in a way that made him feel like an outsider. She whirled around on her chair. "Timothy," she said, astonished. "What? How did you get in here?" she said with an edge of concern. "I thought I'd come to see you at work today." He shrugged. She just stared at him with a deer-in-the-headlights look that had become all too common. "So this is what you do, then?" He made an effort to sound upbeat. A smile crept across her yellow-tinged face as she stood to give him a hug. She felt warm and happy as she embraced him. "This is a gift I'm making for Jen." She offered her hand to Timothy. He could see a little fabric cutout that looked like a person with a mop of yarn for hair. In this light, it was a uniform shade of dingy yellow, and he recognized it as a version of the one tied to her backpack. She still seemed confused at Timothy's presence, like an adult that interrupted playtime with all the worry and troubles of the outside world being involuntarily given to a small child to hold up. He actually felt guilty about her imperceptible facial gestures of awkwardness in the odd light. Just then the music stopped, and bright overhead lights came on. A voice sounded clearly throughout the playroom. "Please be calm, my little ones. Please sit down and wait for the music to start again. Please sit down and wait for the music to start again," it said reassuringly. Just then, 2 security guards approached from behind. "Hello, sir. It appears you've become lost. Can we help you find your way back downstairs?" the closest security guard asked in the most polite and gentle voice he had ever heard. The tone removed all signs of intimidation and brought Timothy great relief. He turned to her and asked, "Would you like to join me for lunch?" With the attention still on both of them, she accepted his offer and turned to walk beside him as the guards politely escorted them back to the changing room. She stopped to retrieve her pack and daytime clothes, but remained in the purple overalls. They walked down the dark hallway to enter the already open elevator doors. She gave an overview of her activities so far as her cheerful demeanour returned during the ride down. They exited the building with no restrictions and proceeded to his car. Chapter 14. They had lunch at a nearby cafe as they discussed what he just witnessed. He tried to keep his composure, but his concern for her safety was forcing his hand. She was baffled at first by his descriptions of dark hallways and weird lights in the playroom and was starting to become upset at his words. "I'm telling you, Theo, it's not what you think." He became exasperated at her inability to understand the situation. "You've been infected with some kind of nanotechnology that allows you to see a fictitious projection. All the walls are concrete and steel. There was no colour on anything," he tried to explain. Her face turned to confusion again as she brought the little cutout into view. She admitted in the noonday sun it had slightly different colours of fabric than she could remember, but nothing to get worked up about. "I'm not sure what you're talking about, Tim," she said in a caring voice. Her happy demeanour tried to return. "So it just doesn't look that colourful to you?" "It's a fantasy, Theo," he said. He tried not to make the words land so hard, but she became distraught. He realised some of the other people in the cafe were now looking in their direction, but he didn't care. "No, Tim, it's not that way at all," she offered the small cutout to him. "Does this look fake?" she continued. Other than his personal objections about the company and what she considered her work to be, he admitted that he witnessed no one being harmed, at least not directly. No one crying for help, or trying to pass him little notes claiming malice or enslavement. No distress at all. He seemed to be the only one out of place there. It was so jarring to witness for him, like he wasn't told, "Hey, You know this is a place where you're supposed to have fun, right? Like some kind of secret club that he didn't understand the rules for. He just sat and stared at the table as he tried to figure out what to do next. He had reservations about letting her re-enter the building and pleaded with her to come home. She refused and added, "Unlike you, Tim. I'm still on the clock," she said with a knowing expression that he recognized. It was the same face he'd had when he was on the clock. They drove back to the Playful-At-Heart building in silence. As they stopped near the front, the number of guards had increased at the front entrance. Theodosia became concerned as they both saw people moving single file out of the building. She jumped out of the car and ran to one of the guards. He could see her speaking in a polite manner, and after a moment she thanked the tall statue of a man, turned, and made her way back to the car. All her happiness drained as she pulled on her seatbelt. It took a few minutes for her to speak as Timothy drove towards home. She explained that the guard told her that the building was temporarily closed for maintenance and that she could come back tomorrow to continue her playtime. He wasn't the most perceptive person at the best of times, but he was keenly aware that she had her emotions in check and was in more distress than her exterior let on. They walked into the apartment and removed their shoes quietly. Theodosia realized suddenly that she was still wearing her overalls and playroom tag. "Oh, shoot," she said out loud. "I hope Em won't be mad that I took these home." Timothy observed her walk into the bedroom wearing the neutral grey bib overalls with a white elastic band around her wrist. He was truly at a loss for words. Had he hallucinated the whole thing, he wondered. He was fearful that they might need some professional help at this point, but decided not to push the matter. They would need some time to figure this out, and he was certain she might need a little more time than he did. The following day, Timothy read on the news that the Playful-At-Heart building downtown had been closed until further notice. He braced himself as he broke the news to Theodosia. She became almost inconsolable and cried for many hours. Someone had even broken into the building and taken pictures of the now unlit space that was one of the many playrooms. Somehow these pictures were even more disconcerting than he recalled. The space looked like a creepy abandoned arcade or amusement park attraction. Underexposed pictures taken with a weak light showed familiar shapes made of foam and plastic, but absent any discernible technology. Odd humanoid figures were placed in various locations that were nearly 3 meters in height. Everything was sized proportionally to make an adult feel small. He thought about holding off showing her the pictures, so as to not exaggerate her current state, and simply attended to her, coming in every few minutes to comfort her the best he could. He realized just how much she was emotionally invested in this place and didn't try to conceal his concern for her well-being. "I don't understand what's going on, but I'm right here and not going anywhere, Theo," he said calmly as she cried openly. Later that day, 2 couriers knocked on the door. Timothy greeted one man and one woman in blue jumpsuits. They handed him a clipboard and asked for Theodosia. They read together the formal letter of termination from Playful-At-Heart. Her expression turned sad again as they asked for her signature, and all objects belonging to Pa. It's no wonder, Timothy thought. This stuff is crawling with expensive nanotech, and I'm sure they're eager to get it back. He was given a list of objects that needed to be returned. 1 size medium bib overalls, 1 backpack, 1 personal monitor wristband, and 1 PA luminescent detection aid, also known as PA recruiter pacifier. Thankfully, Tim didn't see the prototype listed that was still in his possession. He politely returned the items and thanked the couriers. After they left, he quietly went to the bedroom, placed the prototype into an anti-static bag, and stored it neatly in a lockbox. His thoughts went to the nanotech still inhabiting their bodies, but decided not to worry for now. Other than Theodosia's obvious hallucinations, neither seemed to be suffering any ill effects. She was now in the living room, calmly sitting with her arms crossed. He moved over and gave her a hug. She didn't immediately return a hug, so he backed away. As he did, he could see her face was locked in deep concentration. How can I find her? She thought intently. It wasn't all fake, Janelle was real. A sense of responsibility starting to take hold. Where would she be? I don't even have an address to start with. She sat quietly and pondered the problem. She held the small purple fabric cutout with brown yarn for hair, which was presumably the one Janelle had given her. After a long silence, her eyes widened as she turned towards Timothy. "How could I miss that?" she scolded herself. Her eyes started tearing up again. The unkempt hair, a face with more years than her real age might suggest, the subtle signs of malnutrition she thought as the pieces came together. She locked eyes with Timothy. "We need to find her," she said. "We need to find her, Tim," she repeated. "You mean someone named Janelle?" he responded. She nodded as she stood up. "She's about my height, has wild reddish-brown hair, and she's most likely homeless, living about 1 or 2 kilometers around the PAR building downtown," she said sincerely. Timothy saw in her face an unconditional loving concern for someone that was until a few months ago a complete stranger. He even had a momentary thought of jealousy, as he had never seen this side of her before. It was endearing. For what was in the back of his mind at that moment, other than some corporate-funded cutting-edge nanotech of which he had a hand in developing, was a true feeling of guilt. "We will find her, Theo," he said without hesitation. He could see this was now her mission, to find someone with whom she shared a sisterly bond, and he had no place to tell her otherwise. He smiled at her. "We will, but first, let's go shopping." Thank you for listening to Playful-At-Heart Part 1. The author and I hope you've enjoyed it. And if this was indeed a bedtime story for you, have pleasant dreams, my little ones.